although I think you may not think that Jordan himself is going to try Jesus smuggling on you, you fear that somewhere down the line from what he's saying, somebody else will do that trick.
Yeah, it's worse than that. I actually know the people who are clapping are doing that. I hear from those people on a daily basis, right? So that the segment of Jordan's audience that is very happy to be told they can stay on the riverbank of their traditional Christianity for the most part, and they don't have to get into the stream of totally modern, rigorous, rational thinking about everything from first principles, right? That there's something that the Iron Age scribes got right, and it's right for all time. Those are the applause I'm hearing. And however, consciously or not, Jordan is telling them it's okay to stick right there with a shard of the cross.
Okay, well, in Dublin, I actually tried a little conscious Jesus smuggling on Sam to see how that would go in a discussion we had about the central archetype of superheroes, but I'm going to try something a little different tonight. I'm going to try a little direct God smuggling. We won't bother with Jesus. Let's go right to God. Why not? So one of the things I've really tried to do when I've been analyzing religious texts is to take them seriously in the sense that I don't presume that I understand them. And I presume that they're a mystery of sorts. And at least the Bible, for example, is a mystery because we don't really understand the processes by which it was constructed, and we don't understand the processes by which we all agreed collectively over several thousand years to organize the book the way it is organized, or to edit it the way that it's edited, and to keep what's in it and to discard what's not in it, and why it's lasted and why it's had such a huge impact.
I don't want to derail you, but yeah. We do understand the first part of the process all too well. We know that there was a political and all too human process of voting certain texts in for inclusion, and some were in for centuries and then got jettisoned, and Revelation came in far later than. I mean, there were whole generations of Christians who lived and died under the banner of the Bible, and it was a different Bible at the time. They had the wrong Bible. So
well, but it's the same issue that we really don't understand. Fair enough, Sam, and I'm not saying that political, etc. considerations didn't enter into it. I'm sure all human considerations entered into it, but there was some collective process of winnowing, and you can attempt to reduce that to economic or political causes, which is generally what secular assessors like Freud and Marx both did, and with a fair degree of success, I might add, but there's still some mysterious assessment of what it is that will be remembered that entered into it. But it's a separate point to some degree. I'm just saying that my point of departure when looking at these texts is one of an essential radical ignorance. I don't assume that I understand the mechanisms by which they were generated or edited or collected or kept or remembered, or why they had the impact they had. Now, I've been thinking a lot about the idea of, let's say, God the Father, because that's a very common archetypal representation of God the Father. So I'm going to tell you an experience that I had that I've never really told any audience about. I had a vision at one point and the vision had to do with a dialogue that I was having with my father. And you have a father, right? And when you're a little kid, you act out your father when you pretend to be a father. And what you're doing when you're acting out your father isn't imitating your father, because you don't duplicate precisely the actions that your father ever took in his life. What you do is you watch your father across multiple contexts, and you abstract out something like a spirit of the father. And then when you're a child, you implement that spirit of the father in your pretend play, and you come to embody that deeply. So the notion is that people can abstract out something like a spirit of the father. And that's part of our mimetic tendency, which is a very powerful human cognitive tendency. And in this vision, I first started to talk with my father, and I would say more with the spirit of my father, because he wasn't actually there. And I would say it was the wisest part of him. And then that sort of transformed into a discussion that I had with a series of ancestral spirits. And then that transformed itself into a vision of God himself, with whom I had a conversation. And this was a visionary experience. And then that all went away, and I spent months and months thinking about it, and I thought, so you guys can tell me what you think about this. And this sort of stretches my cognitive ability to its utmost limit to contemplate such things. But here's a biological argument. I already made the case that a child can extract out the spirit of the father and embody it, and that's necessary insofar as you're going to be a father and a wise one. But we can also extract out the spirit of the father over much longer periods of time, because my father was a father because he imitated his father, who imitated his father, who imitated his father, as far back in time as you can go. And there's a cumulative development of the spirit of the father across time. Now then the question might be, does this spirit of the father have any reality other than the metaphorical? And I would say, damn right it has a reality, and I can describe a biological reality, and I don't know what this says about any background metaphysics, but here's a hypothesis. We know that human beings separated from chimpanzees over the course of the last 7 million years, at least in large part because of human female sexual selectivity. So it was the spirit of femininity collectively that helped elevate us to the degree that we have been elevated above our chimpanzee co-ancestor. But here's something interesting to contemplate. What is it precisely that makes men desirable to women? And so I have a bit of a hypothesis about that. So here's what men do. They get together in productive groups, and they orient themselves toward a certain task. And they produce a hierarchy around that task, because whenever you implement a task, you produce a hierarchy. And they vote up the most competent men to the top of the hierarchy, and then the women select the competent men from the top of the hierarchy. But the vote that determines who the competent men are that are more likely to reproduce is a consequence of male evaluation of men, and that's occurred over millennia. And so there's a spirit of the father that's embedded in the patriarchal hierarchy that acts as the primary selection mechanism that offers men up to women and plays a cardinal role in human evolution. And it looks like we've personified that spirit of the father in our religious imagery, and that's how it looks to me. But then there's something that's even more mysterious and deep about that that's worth considering, is that apparently the entire course of evolutionary history has conspired to produce human beings, and we could argue that it could have been different, but it certainly hasn't been different. And that means that that selective spirit of the father has been part of the process that's generated our very being, and it's certainly possible that that collective spirit of the father reflects something metaphysically fundamental about the structure of reality itself.
Wait, I was with you up until the last sentence, yes. Well, insofar as I agree with virtually all of that, I should say that none of that should give comfort to people who want to hold on to this notion that certain of our books might have been revealed by the creator of the universe. Right? Well,
it depends on what you mean by the creator.
Yeah. I'm just saying that the world we're living in now is one in which we have whole societies shattered over this notion that some books weren't written by human beings. Right? There's a different class of book. Right? There's a different shelf in the library where the products of almost certainly merely human brains are venerated for all time and considered uneditable and unignorable by the majority of human beings.
Yeah, well, it's clear that revelation can devolve into fundamentalism, and that's a real
problem. So there is a risk in all this always, there's an often made critique, but that when you're talking about religion, you're talking about the Inquisition, you're talking about the jihadists, you're not talking about somebody who wants to go to their local Anglican church once a year, maybe get the children into school, and maybe when they're at some desolate moment of their lives returns to this as the place that stores meaning. I mean, the thing that I think Jordan and I are in agreement on in this is that thing, with a quote from Schopenhauer in the Dialogue on Religion, when he says, that truth may be like water, it needs vessels to carry it. And when we were talking about this the other night, you admitted that one of the consequences, perhaps, of the parents sort of going through the belief structures they may not believe in anymore, but they keep doing it, is a demonstration of what you said was the non-embarrassing options that atheists have come up with. But it may also be that since we don't have very many vessels, that cracked and damaged and sometimes transparent as they are, what vessels you have might be worth holding on to.
Well, no, I think the challenge here is, I mean, it feels that, well, first of all, we should first notice that these comments very often take the form of, you and I don't need this stuff, but most other people do, right? And that is,
it can do that, yeah.
Yes, I mean, that's inevitably, and it sort of took that form at one moment the other night, where you acknowledge that people of low intelligence are best placed in a conservative paradigm, a traditionally conservative paradigm, because there's less to think through, right? Now, obviously, you don't want your view on religion summarized by, it's good for stupid people.
Well, I do want it summarized to some degree that way, because one of the things
yes,
we do.
I'm giving you the opportunity again to put this foot in your mouth.
But I would say not only. I mean, the thing is that we're all stupid, and some of us are far stupider than others.
But we're not. But we're not that stupid. I mean,
but there's another problem, Sam. I think, and this is obviously a contentious one. And one of the things I don't go to church, but there is one thing I admire about the church, and that is that it's managed to serve as a repository for these fundamental underlying fictions for 2 millennia. And that's really something bloody unbelievable. I mean, the great, what would you say?
It is bloody unbelievable.
Well, look, Sam, everything's soaked in blood. We have no disagreement about that, but the secular alternatives that we produced in the 20th century were certainly no less blood-sodden, and they produced nothing of any productivity whatsoever.
We need not do it now, but we have to put to bed that secular canard.
What would you do?
Well, it's just not so that Stalinism was the product of secularism or atheism, and nor were
well, it was
fascism.
a product. It wasn't an inevitable product or the product.
It wasn't. And please, anyone who has this meme in your head, please just allow the next sentences I speak to just push it out, because I'm so sick of hearing this. This idea that the greatest crimes of the 20th century were somehow the product of atheism. Right. When you look at what actually engineered these atrocities, it was something that looked very much like a religion. It was a religion in every way apart from an explicit commitment to otherworldliness. It was based on
that's a big difference.
Dogmatism through and through. It was based on personality cults that grew up around figures like Stalin and Hitler and Mao. It was not the ideas of Bertrand Russell and David Hume that brought us to the Gulag or to Auschwitz.
Yes, but then you can't say it's the thought of Jesus Christ either. I mean,
well, no, it's true. No, I can say that. I can say it was the thought of St. Augustine, and I can say it was the thought of St. Thomas Aquinas, explicitly, that gave us the Inquisition. This is a fact.